Hi, I'm Chris Williams with AAM Insight, and today on the program, my guest is Hugh Pope. He's been reporting from the Middle East for over 30 years, and now he works at the International Crisis Group. He's most recently the author of a memoir about his time in the Middle East, Dining with al-Qaeda. Thank you for joining me, Hugh.
Thank you for having me.
Great. I want to begin with the story of that meal you had with, I guess, a missionary from al-Qaeda just a few months after 9/11. And that story was both chilling, but also, I think, very revealing. So if you could tell the audience a little bit about that meal, but also what it kind of illustrated to you or how it helped you understand the motivations behind 9/11.
Mm-hmm. What happened was that I went to Saudi Arabia 2 months after September the 11th, puzzled and intrigued by why there were 15 Saudis on the planes that crashed into the targets that they chose in America. And it seemed odd to me because I knew Saudi Arabia quite well, and it seemed almost unfair the way Saudi Arabia was being demonized by American media at the time, because I knew that yes, there was some bad sides perhaps, or fundamentalist sides of Saudi Arabia, but it wasn't fair to tar the whole country with the brush. So I thought, well, let me find out more about them, and I asked a friend to take me to a contact, and eventually we ended up in a rather bare concrete house near a mosque on the edge of Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, where at a certain point in walked this missionary from clearly a fundamentalist point of view. He had a very short robe, straggly beard, and very young, 24 years old, I learnt later. And he walked in, and without really greeting me and saying anything to me, he just sat down and said, "I think I should kill you." And I replied, "I assure you that this is quite unnecessary," and we started to debate the issue. And I was lucky in being able to speak Arabic with him and to be able to conjure up some arguments about why it would be religiously wrong to kill me, and that I had permission to be in his country. And then he said, well, I don't recognize the king of the country. And so eventually it came down to the fact that I could point out that the Friday prayers were read out in the name of this king, and therefore it was legitimate for me to have my visa, which he read very carefully, from that king, and we settled it. The fact is that he saw me as a threat, as a representative of a cruel and uncaring West that was against Muslims, and possibly a spy for that same West. So it took some time to win his confidence and to engage him, and once we were engaged, he was ready to tell me quite a lot about the men that he'd known who had taken part in the action.
One thing that I was particularly kind of interested in throughout the whole book, you mentioned in the prologue, and then it went out throughout, was not to view the Middle East through an ideological lens that so often happens. For example, good moderate versus bad radical was one of the interesting examples. As a journalist there for so long, how have you tried to do that?
Well, the first thing I did when trying to write the book was I will only write what I saw myself or experienced myself. I don't want it to be a book about testing theories or putting up straw men and knocking them down. I'll just say my experiences and try and link them to the arguments, but without stressing it. And one of the things I also tried to do was never use the word Islam, for instance, because I think that when you put Islam into a piece of writing, everyone understands something different from it. And so you actually confuse people. And that is, I think, it blocks you from understanding the very wide variety of the Muslim countries of the world. Take the main ones in the Middle East: Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, all sharing Muslim reference points, Mecca, the pilgrimage, and certain aspects of doctrine, but not by any means all aspects of doctrine, and certainly not the same religious organization. Completely different religious cultures in all those countries. So you cannot say that Islam per se is a driver of what's going on. Religion reflects the societies it's in, and if it's a prosperous, happy society, the religion is quite likely to be prosperous and happy. I live in Turkey. If you read the newspapers in Ramadan, the holy month of fasting, the kind of advice being given to the people by preachers is exactly the same as an Anglican priest in my hometown in England would be giving from his pulpit. I mean, it's be nice, be good, be charitable. You know, it's wrong to see the Middle East as a special case. These are ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances.
I think tied to that was, and I thought one of the most interesting parts of the book was your kind of discussion or back and forth with your editors, and what you called a virtual world of the Middle East that a lot of people understood versus the reality you saw on the ground, and trying to be able to translate. And I could sense a lot of frustration in your writing that it wasn't always coming through. Can you talk about those two kind of distinct worlds and how you tried to bridge that gap?
Mm-hmm. Well, you could say that the reality in any situation is quite broad, and with the Middle East there is a specific part of the spectrum that we would see in the Middle East, and from the United States perspective it would be another part of the spectrum, and there would be a middle bit which would be shared perceptions that were common narratives understood and accepted in both parts. Now, if you stay in that reservation, you're safe and you don't disturb anyone, and you're credible. If you go out of the reservation, you're incredible to one side or the other. And as a journalist, your whole life story is dedicated to being seen to be credible. So of course you try and stay in the reservation. But if you're a journalist, most of the journalists I know, they know that there's these other things which are also true, but you have to be able to explain it to them. So we're trying to push the envelope. The trouble with the Middle East is that reservation is quite narrow, especially 10 years ago when I was appointed the Middle East correspondent for Wall Street Journal, a great US newspaper. There were certain topics that would elicit very strong reactions in America, especially to do with Israel.
I don't want to commit the sin of having the positive headline, but what sort of hope is there for the generation moving forward, or what are the reasons for despair?
I find Middle Eastern societies are like eroded landscapes. They've lost all their best people because of all the wars and revolutions. 15, at least, maybe 20 major wars and revolutions in the last 100 years that have stripped all the best people out of those countries. Many of them refugees, and all the most talented people are leaving. The great challenge for all these societies is to keep their youth inside the countries. A few of the peripheral countries are doing better. Turkey has 5,000 young Turkish students, for half Middle Eastern country, come to America. Almost all of them go back in the end, and they bring things back from America which are of great use to their country. However, the core Middle Eastern states, that's not like Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, anyone from there who can find a good life elsewhere will take it. And the challenge is to stabilize the situation, and in order to make it possible for young people to believe that they're going to be able to build productive, happy lives there.